All right, is everyone ready? JD, are you ready?
I am.
All right, let's get to it. So I would just like to start off by thanking you all so much for judging and flowing. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to your critiques after this. JD, thank you for debating me. This is going to be a fun round, and I'm really looking forward to it. So the resolution for today is students should not be penalized for skipping class. And we're going to be looking at this through a weighing mechanism of net benefits. And I just have some definitions to start off with. So students, we're scoping this to students attending a college or a university, so they would be paying for their education. Should not, meaning a bad idea. Penalize, subject to penalty or punishment affecting grades. And skipping class is not attending class. That one's pretty self-explanatory. And before I get into my contentions, I just would like to throw in that a penalty is not something that's self-inflicted. So just remember that. So this is something that would be from a professor or a university. So my first contention today is benefits to students. My second is benefits to professors, and third, benefits to society. So my first contention, benefits to students. If students are not penalized for skipping class, this will help the students grow as individuals. This is treating them more like adults by allowing them to make their own decisions and to be responsible adults. And students will rise to the expectations that are set for them. We've learned, I'm in a TESOL class right now, teaching English class, and we've studied about how students will rise to the expectations that are set to them by their teachers particularly. And so students will rise, and so if professors expect the students to attend, they will rise and they will attend, so attendance policies and penalties are not necessary. And just as an example of students rising to expectations, whenever I was 9 years old, my mom had another child, and so I really had to grow up and help to take care of my younger siblings and to be more responsible. And so I rose to that occasion, and other children and students are the same way. And another thing is students pay for these classes themselves, and so it benefits the students for them to be able to make their own decisions. My second contention is benefits to professors. Professors, if students should not be penalized, they don't have to worry about keeping up with attendance, and the professors are not babysitters. The students in college are generally 18 to 22-year-olds. These are legal adults. And so the professors are not babysitters. They shouldn't have to hold these adults' hands, making them come to class with attendance policies. Kelly Marshall, a professor at DePaul University, does not implement a mandatory attendance policy, and she says, and I quote, "It is beneficial to me because I don't have to worry about marking who's there, who's not, who came late, and who left early. Additionally, I don't have to haggle with students over excused and unexcused absences." So this is a benefit to the professors that they do not have to worry about attendance policies and haggling with students over grades and whether their absence was profited or not. So my third contention today is benefits to society. By treating these students like adults and not penalizing them for skipping class, it's helping prepare them for the real world. In real society, after they get out of college, and even a lot of college students work as it is, employers do not hold their employees' hands and beg them to come to work. If they don't show up to work, they don't have a job. And so it's really helping prepare them for actual society. Also, society benefits immensely from having fully functioning adults that are able to make responsible and capable decisions. The college students today are the young society members that are able to vote and are able to participate in society. And so by them being treated like adults, it's preparing them for the rest of their lives, and they are able to, they're really able just to better be prepared to be fully functioning adult. So with that, I stand down for cross-examination.
So if everybody's ready, and Juliana, then we'll go ahead and get started. So that was a great speech. I've just got a couple of clarifying questions for you. So first of all, you brought up a weighing mechanism of net benefits, correct?
Correct.
And it was net benefits to students, professors, and society?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So you would agree with me that affirming the resolution would be making this, let me rephrase that question. It is your contention, okay, yeah, you would agree with me that affirming the resolution would mean making this essentially a national standard across the board, that is? That professors should not be penalized, correct?
I'm not arguing that professors shouldn't be penalized.
Or that students shouldn't be penalized, excuse me.
Right, well, and this is just whether it's a good or bad idea, and should not in the resolution indicates that it's a bad idea.
Okay, and so you would agree with me that in affirming the resolution, then we should not let professors penalize students?
Penalize them as in punishing or negatively impacting their grades.
Right, for skipping class.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Now, you would agree with me that all professors are different, correct?
That is correct.
And you would agree with me that professors teach different classes, correct?
Absolutely.
And you would agree that all classes are different and no two classes are the same, correct?
That is correct.
And so therefore expectations for different classes are different, correct?
Sure, we can say that, yes.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
All right.
I saw that look in your eye. All right, so if everybody's ready, and Juliana, all righty, then we'll go ahead and get started. Now, before I start my speech, I would like to make one clarifying and important comment. Just because you're standing outside of class and skipping class does not mean that you are an outstanding student. Go ahead and give me that emotion, Valley. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming out and judging today. Apparently, Zach was right in that you are here of your free will because you can skip class or you don't have to skip class. So thank you all for choosing to come and come to class, even though Braden and Emily and some of the others, or I think that's all that's missing, didn't come. So anyways, thank you all for coming. Thank you also for judging. Go ahead and accept your decision and your criticism. So thank you. I'd like to go ahead and agree with the top case presented by my opponent. Net benefits is a great weighing mechanism, and she brought up some stellar definitions, so let's work with those. Now, her contentions, on the other hand, I do have a bone to pick with. Her first contention was talking about the benefits to students. Now, she essentially talked about how this helps them grow and that these students will rise to the expectation. And she brought up her own personal example. My response to this, you can simply write down as expectations with incentives. Yes, professors can have these expectations of these students, but there's no reason why they cannot have this expectation backed up by these incentives. Like I talked about in cross-examination and like my opponent agreed to, all of these classes and all these professors are different, and therefore there are different expectations. In my sociology class, all my professor did was teach outside of the book. In my history class, my professor, all of his test material came from his lectures and not from the book. So there are different classes with different expectations. Some require you to go, some require you to not go. So yes, in some cases, professors should not penalize students for not coming because it's not necessary. But in other cases, professors do need to penalize them because what they're talking about in lectures and in class with quizzes and all these other different assignments that they have in class, it is important to go. So this should not be a universal law or a universal standard to impose on professors. Professors should choose based on their teaching style and their way their class is set up. Her second contention was talking about professors, and kind of the same line of thought. My response to this is that this is actually the professor's choice. It's their prerogative to choose whether or not they wish to impose this standard on their students based off of the material that they have. So it should be up to the professors, not to us debaters, whether or not we should penalize students for skipping classes. Her third and final contention was talking about the benefits to society and how we're essentially helping grow these students. This actually reminds me of my mother when she used to tell me to watch your head after I've already hit it on the table. What this has in common with her argument is that both lessons are taught too late. We need to teach these students what it means to be punctual, what it means to be diligent, and to actually show up on time and meet the standards that you have agreed to when you enroll in classes. So with that, I'd like to bring up a few contentions. My first contention will be how this actually would harm education as a whole. Second, the cost to the students. And then finally, how there are actually alternatives to this. So the first contention is how it harms education. Actually, sub-point A under this is how the U.S. ranks in education across the world. Right now, it's pretty low. It's approximately around 38 in math, 24 in science. So different numbers vary, but the idea here is that in every single study you look at, we're pretty doggone low. And the reason why is because according to Joe Montgomery, who's a chief marketing officer at Core Principal, an education studying company, which he essentially said that the typical college student skips up to an entire year's worth of classes at a traditional four-year university. So because of this, no one should be surprised that 45% of students fail to earn a diploma within 6 years of entering college. So this is the reason why we're low on the totem pole, is because we're skipping classes. Subpoint B is talking about how attendance is necessary for learning. Again, from the same source, Core Principal, studies actually show that class attendance is the #1 predictor of grades in a college course, outranking time spent studying skills, high school grades, or standardized tests. This is the most weighted principle that we can find when it comes to education. Core Principal partnered with Crimson Hexagon, which is also another education studying company. They essentially said that despite this clear connection, even the most optimistic academic studies find that nearly 1 in 5 U.S. college students are skipping on any given day, with absentee rates reaching up to 70% for some large classes at major state universities. Why are we skipping, though? That's subpoint C. This data, consisting of nearly 1.1, Class 120, along with Core Principal, gathered a study from 1.1 million tweets from students talking about why they skipped class. And of the top 5 reasons, the first was hanging out with friends. That accounted for 37% of the responses. The second reason was they were too tired. That was 32%. Recreation was 17%. Studying was only 11%, and then the weather was 3%. This is why we're skipping class. We're not skipping class because it's beneficial. We're not skipping class because it's a good idea or a bad idea. We're skipping class because we don't want to, and we don't want to learn because of our laziness. We're not teaching students how to be prepared in the real world. My second contention you can tag as the financial cost, or really the cost to students, how it's not beneficial. According to a recent survey by Class 120 in 2015, along with US Today College and College Board, the average college student skips 240 classes by the time he or she graduates. For students at an in-state public university, this adds up to $7,200 of wasted tuition money over the course of 4 years, and $24,960 for students at private schools. So the idea here is that we're not helping students, we're not teaching them how to be responsible with their time or with their money, we're actually encouraging them to be irresponsible. My third and final contention is simply the alternatives that we have. If students need to not be at class, they can take online classes. They can look at Rate My Professor to see what kind of professors they need, what kind of professors stress attendance and what don't. We also have these things called excused absences that these students can use as well. There are alternatives to universalizing this maxim. It should not be universalized, and as a result, the resolution is negated. Thank you.
All right. You ready?
I am.
Judges ready? Okay. Thank you so much for that great negative speech. I just have a few questions for you. So, what was your second tagline? I did not catch that.
My second tagline was talking about...
Just the tagline.
Yes, it was financial cost.
All right. And so, just in refutation of my first contention, you did talk about different expectations, right, in different classes?
Correct. Expectations with incentives.
Okay. And then second was it's up to the professor, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you did agree with my weighing mechanism, right?
Net benefits.
Net benefits. Wonderful. Okay, so just to get a little bit of clarification, for your last off-case point, you brought in about alternatives, correct? Alternatives
Yes.
to actually being in class?
Alternatives to universalizing the resolution.
So these alternatives were not alternatives to actually being in class? They were just...
They are alternatives to being in class. If a student does need to skip class, for example, for a job or because they need rest or something like that, they can take online classes. They can use their excused absences if the professor offers them. They can use Rate My Professor to see what these professors want, that sort of thing.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that. Okay, that's all that I have. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Judges, are you ready? Opponent ready?
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to it. All right, I only have 3 minutes, so I'm just going to jump right into it. So my opponent did agree to my top case, my definitions, and my weighing mechanism of net benefits. So jumping right into his refutation of my contentions. For my first contention, which was benefits to students, he said that expectations are different and there's expectations with incentives for each class. However, if the students do not go to class, that's their own fault. If they don't go to class and they are not prepared for an exam or prepared for an assignment or miss out on an assignment, that is their own fault. I would like to point you back to, in my first speech, I said that a penalty is something that is not self-inflicted. This is a penalty that would be implemented by the professor, a punishment or penalty affecting grade implemented by the professor. If a student does not go to class because they choose not to for whatever reason, that is their own fault. It's their responsibility to make sure that they get caught up. In his second refutation of my second contention, it's up to the professor. That's right, it is up to the professor, but this would benefit the professors to not have to worry about penalizing students. I brought in an example about Kelly Marshall, a professor who is glad to not have to implement an attendance policy and have to worry about penalizing and punishing students. And then for third, he said it's taught too late. This is something that's taught too late. However, in college, it's still a formative time in students' lives. This is a time whenever we are still figuring out who we want to be. And so this is a time for us to, because we're all college students here, to learn how we can better form and benefit society. So jumping into his off-case contentions, his first is it harms education. And he brought in some statistics about class attendance. However, in my research, I don't remember where this is from, but I found a study that said that during a time in the study of over 5,000 students across the country, in a time whenever there was no class attendance policy, test scores were actually better than whenever there was not an attendance policy. And then for his second contention, which was financial, these students are the ones paying for their classes. The students who, they're paying for them so they can make the decision, they should be able to make the decision whether or not they want to go to class. If they want to waste that money, then that should be up to them. They are adults. And then his third was alternatives. So he brought in about rate my professor and unexcused and excused absences. However, these are ways that these unexcused absences still go to these attendance policies, and if they go over these absences, students will still be penalized by professors. And so with that, I stand down and urge an affirmative ballot.
So if everybody's ready, and Juliana? Alrighty, then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure we're all familiar with Newton's first law, which essentially says that an object in motion or at rest will tend to stay in motion or at rest. And you may or may not be familiar with his second and third law, but those aren't really important to this round. What is important to this round is Newton's lesser known fourth law. A student in bed will tend to stay in bed unless acted upon by a large enough panic. And this large enough panic, I would argue, is going to be attendance policies for certain classes. So with that, I'd like to thank you all again for coming out and judging and flowing today, and to thank you, Juliana, for debating. It has been a fun debate, and I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll still be friends afterwards. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and respond to her arguments and then bring up some voting issues of my own. So she talked about how, in response to my argument talking about how we need to have these expectations with incentives because different classes have different expectations, she essentially said that it's the student's own fault, it's self-inflicted, etc. My response to this is that she actually agreed, therefore, that it's actually bad. She's saying it's the student's fault that they're missing classes and that they're having bad grades. So she agrees that it's bad. So why should we let them do this without having this extra incentive to get them to class? We saw through my study, which essentially remained unrefuted, that skipping class actually harms the education for the student. So why not have this expectation or this incentive with an expectation to not force them to go to class, but give them that incentive to go to class? Then she talked about how, she brought up a professor who actually likes the idea of not having attendance grades. And that's fine. If this professor doesn't like it, then she doesn't like it. But some other professors, many of which who I have, actually the majority of which I have had, actually like having attendance policies. So let's let the professors decide, because it's their classroom, their material, they should decide. Then she talked about how this is a formative time for these students. I would agree. This is a formative time for these students, so let's teach them how to live in the real world, to be punctual, to be diligent, and to actually meet the expectations that they are given. Then she talked, her argument regarding benefits to society, then she responded to my contentions, excuse me. My first contention, she brought up a study that talked about how test scores were better without having an attendance policy. I would agree. In one case, there may have been a study where people had better test grades in a specific class because the class didn't necessarily require coming to class. That's fine, but other classes do require it. Therefore, we should have attendance policies if the professors choose to do this. Then she talked in response to my second contention about the cost of the students. She said they're paying, so let them decide. Well, my argument here is simply that it's not net beneficial to students to skip class because they're wasting money and they're harming their own education. So the idea here is that this isn't beneficial for these students. That's the impact, so it fails the weighing mechanism that she and I have agreed to. Then my last contention was talking about the different alternatives. She said that you can go over the absences. Sure, you can, but again, you can look at Rate My Professor to see what kind of absence policies they have, and also that, but there are still online courses that you can take that don't require you to be physically present in a classroom. So with that, I'd like to give my voting issues, which will be fivefold. And the first letter of each voting issue will spell out something that all of us college students, I'm sure, can agree to, and that's broke. The first one is benefits. That's the B, benefits. The benefits of having these attendance policies are numerous, as we saw through the educational benefits brought up by several studies and experts that I gave in my first speech. The second one is R, real world. We're preparing these students for the real world. If we want them to actually succeed in the real world and in the United States as a whole, then we need to teach them how to be punctual and diligent with their time and not waste their money. The third is O, options. These professors in schools should have the option or the choice to decide whether or not they want attendance policies in their classroom. It's their prerogative. The fourth is cost, spelled with a K, because we're illiterate, because we don't go to class. The cost to these students is exceedingly great, and as a result, we should not advocate for this resolution. The fifth and final is E, education, or experts, because we talked about how it's good for education because of the experts, so broke E, maybe. So with that, I'd like to stand down and advocate for a negative ballot. Thank you. Just really couldn't find a C.
All right, judges, are you ready? John David, are you ready?
Indeed I am.
All right, let's go. So I just want to begin by saying thank you so much to judges for coming out and coming to class and judging today, and for flowing, Michaela. And John David, thank you so much for debating me today. This has been a really fun round, and so I'm going to jump right into my last speech. So you've heard the flow multiple times throughout this speech, and so I'm just going to jump right into refuting his voters and then giving you some of my own. So his voters very cleverly do spell out the word broke, and so his first one is benefits. And so he talked about these numerous benefits from experts and benefits that do not benefit students and do not benefit these professors, but I would like to point out that I was able to bring up how it does benefit students, and it does benefit professors, and it does benefit society by not penalizing students for skipping class. And so his second voter is the real world. He talked about how this is too late to teach them, but we're all in college right now. This is a formative time, and so we're still learning. I sure don't know everything that I ever want to know in life, and so learning is a lifelong process, and these are lessons that can be formed throughout life. So 3 is options. He once again talked about online classes and things like Rate My Professor. However, online classes do not even require an attendance policy, so those do not even truly relate to this round about not penalizing students for skipping class, because you can't skip an online class. So his fourth was cost with a K. So cost, he brought in about these by students wasting money, but this is part of students learning and students growing. They need to be able to make these responsible decisions. They were able to get into college. They were able to come up with the money or the loans to pay for their college, so they can make those adult decisions as to whether or not they want to go to class. And so 5 is education. He talked about this being harmful to their education, but once again, I would like to bring up that study that the 5,000 students that were studied across the country, their test scores were higher whenever there was no attendance policy. And so I have some voters for you of my own today. Sorry, they don't spell out anything cute, but I have some really good voters to show you why you should vote for the affirmative. So the first one is the weighing mechanism. The weighing mechanism is net benefits. And I have shown you how by students not being penalized for skipping class, it benefits the students, benefits the professors, and benefits society. My second is adults. These students are 18 to 22-year-olds. They are adults. They are legal and can participate in society, and so therefore they can make their own decisions. 3, not babysitters. The professors are not babysitters, and they should not be expected to hold the students' hands and make them go to class. And then 4 is the future. These students are the future of society. They are in society right now, and so it's important that they learn to be responsible. And with that, I stand out and urge an affirmative ballot.